Today I'm going to bring you a new piece to the limited tool series, a benchtop router table. There's a lot happening in this small footprint, but we'll cover it all later in the video. This video is sponsored by Wish, and chances are you've heard of them, but if you're like me and never heard of them, let me put you on. Wish is an e-commerce platform with millions of products with huge discounts. They have just about everything you can think of, and I mean everything. I legit didn't know what to think when I first logged on to the app, until I saw a 2 terabyte thumb drive for just $7, and I'm like, what? So I went on a little shopping spree and I was able to land all these router bits and a few more hand tools at a deep discount. Now you're getting these deals directly from a manufacturer for a low cost, and it's kind of fun hunting down deals, reading the reviews, and if you just download the Wish app today, it's simple and easy to use. One tip I learned is you want to look for the items with the little truck symbol. That means you'll get your items in just a few days. There is a lot to do in this project, so we're gonna roll this intro and we're just gonna get right into this. Now there's a lot of detail in this build and there's so much to get done. I'm gonna dive right in and mark all the sections that needs to be routed first. Now these slots will be used for the drawer slides. It's also going to help me keep the cost down so I don't need any hardware for those. Now since this is a limited tool build, I'm going to use the least amount of tools possible. So if you have a table saw or other tools that can get the job done, by all means use those. And with the panels routed out, it's time to attach them. All joints will be glued, but I'll also use the nail gun to hold everything together. Now that the two sides are on, I'm going to add the spacers. The spacer will help create the track for the drawers. That 1/4 inch panel pinned to the bottom is the bottom of the drawer. What I should have did here was take something super thin like paper and put it between that and the spacer. This had a little more friction than I was hoping for, so I almost had to sand off an entire layer just to get this to move freely. I then sat the divider on the spacers, then took the inside panel, marked the location for those, glued, and then nailed those on. I'm going to use a piece of scrap wood to test the slot just to make sure it works at the bottom, and also do that at the top. After putting the top on, I first nailed the outside panel, then I focused on the inside panel. Now that the glue is all set up, I'll then test the slots once more. I did have some friction on one of the slots, but not a big deal because I can fix that with sanding. So now I'll move my focus to building a large drawer at the bottom. This one's going to be a very simple construction. The large panel at the bottom is also going to act as the drawer slide, so that's going to make it a lot easier to not have any hardware and keeping the construction extremely simple. Now on the bottom side of the front cover to the drawer, I cut a 1/4 inch rabbet in it. This is so that the bottom panel can butt right up against it and have a location to be glued. Now after I found a location for the router plate, I then reference off of that to create the tracks for the router fence. In this case I'm going to use T-tracks, but if you wanted to go with a more cost-effective way, or you don't have access to T-tracks, another solution is to just route in a couple holes. I made multiple passes until I was able to get down to the thickness of the T-track. And at this point I can take a chisel and then square off the end so that the T-track can slide all the way in. And once I'm done with this track, I'll do the same thing for the other track. I'm also going to add a T-track in the router fence, and this should give you some flexibility just in case you want to add a featherboard or you want to add some stops. Now the T-track could have went the entire distance, but I want to leave the middle section open so I can have the maximum flexibility just in case I need to put a tall bit in the router. And it may look a little slim at the top once I remove this, but with all the additional pieces on the back, the dust box and all, that's going to make this a bit sturdy and it shouldn't have any problem. Now I'm going to make up the base for the router fence, and I'll repeat this twice. And everything should line up, so I can now attach the back to the front. On the back of the router fence, I'm going to make the holes long so I can have some wiggle and play in the router fence so I can shift it back and forth. This also helps because I don't have to be that accurate with the bolt placement. The small drawers are really simple and it's only made up of 3 parts. The bottom, which is made up of some hardboard that I had left over, a piece of plywood to give me the depth for the router bit, and also a front. The important thing here is to not get wood glue in the tracks because this friction slide will not work. After sandwiching the two, I'm going to use a few nails to speed up the process, but you can sandwich the two and then clamp them together. The main reason for going with this design is I wanted to keep the cost down. It was also important for the track to finish off even with the front. This is so that you don't see that gap in the track if the drawer is pushed all the way in. Now, although I'm using nail and wood glue, you can totally go with pocket hole screws here, just hide them from the bottom. The safety switch is going to be mounted on the front side of the router table and I need a way to support it, so I'm going to create this little piece here, then I glue it in the location that I think is the best. Adding a back not only make this look cleaner, but it also acts as a stop so you can't push the drawers all the way through. Now at the moment I can't really think of any reason why I would need to remove the back panel, but just in case I did screw them on so that I could if I needed to. Now at first I was just going to drill one hole and attach my router right to the plywood. But then I thought about that I may be switching routers, so I decided to just cut this hole open and then use a metal plate. I do want the metal plate to sit flush with the top of the plywood. So this means I have to do a lot of routing and my router base is just not big enough to do this. So I find it easier to just take a piece of plexiglass and attach your router right to it. This way you have more control of your router and you can safely make this route. I did practice on a few pieces of scrap wood so I can get the depth right before I committed to my router table. The next thing I did was trace the perimeter of the plate. I then utilized the hole that was already in the table and then I began the routing process. I did just enough to get close to the line, and lastly I cleaned that up using a razor and a chisel. I'm using a 5" by 5" 1/8" thick piece of aluminum. If you have a bigger router base, then you more than likely have to increase the size of this plate. In order to get my router closest to the plate, I need to cut out the middle of this. But one thing to keep in mind is you need that support going around to hold the plate. To attach the plate, I marked 4 mounting holes, drilled them out, and then used a countersink bit to countersink the holes. The screw head should sit just below the surface of the plate so that your subject don't interfere with it. Since everything is so easy to get to, I'm not going to be removing this plate as much, but if you do want to remove this plate, I would recommend using some threaded insert. I took a small piece of plywood, then I transferred the router base holes over to that, and I used that as my template. I'm going to take that same piece of template, line up the holes, and drill the center point. The factory hole that's in the router base is 1 1/8 inches, but I'm going to increase the size on that so I can use a bit with a wider diameter. For the drawer pulls, I didn't measure, I just pulled a line out from one corner to the other corner, and right where the lines crossed, that was the center. I repeated that for all the drawers, then drilled the holes. Right now I'm going to work on the stop for the router fence. I cut off a section from a used piece of PVC panel I had on hand, and you can absolutely use plywood or melamine or anything you want to for this, but since I had this, I decided to go ahead and use it. Creating a long hole in it will allow me to have an up and down adjustment. Now this router table was really being greedy and taking up all of my T-track screws, which I need for other projects. So what I'm gonna do is just use one screw per stop, then I'm gonna take sandpaper and put it at the bottom of the stop and also the top. So when I tighten up the knob, the sandpaper should prevent the block from twisting. So while I was at it, I decided to add my other router to the plate. But I had a change of heart and I'm gonna push that off to another time because I have some other plans. So that should explain the 2 unused holes that you see in the router plate. It's almost that time to apply finish. I'm gonna soften the edges by doing a quick round over at the top and also do a round over on some of the pieces in the router fence. With everything being sanded down, it's time to make that tough decision, and that's what's the finish gonna be. I'm actually gonna keep it simple on my end. I'm gonna match the homemade table saw that I made, so it's gonna have the same color white bottom and also a light brown top. For the top, I'm breaking out the Danish oil, and for the bottom, keeping it simple with white. Alright, so everything got a fresh coat on it. It's time to start putting it together. I'm now going to wire up the safety switch, and this piece of plywood represents the distance from the safety switch to the junction box. I'll need to use push-on spade connectors to connect the wires to the safety switch. After stripping the conductors, I then put solder on the strands to make it act as a solid piece of wire. Now at this point, you can go ahead and put your connectors on and crimp them on, but I'm going to put on a shrink tube on them, then put the connectors on and apply a little more solder. So I'm going to loosen up the solder on the inside, which in hopes that that should hold on to the jacket while I put more inside the hole. Now majority of this is going to be out of the way and behind the piece of wood, so none of this will actually be exposed, but I wanted to put the heat shrink on it just so that you can't accidentally stick your finger in there and get shocked. I'm now going to connect the ground wire from the power source to the outlet. Now I'll need to take a jumper from the outlet to the switch. I'm going to first wire up the white wire, which is the neutral. I'll then connect the black wire, which is the live. This one should go on the gold terminals. So the goal here is the tool will be plugged into the outlet will be going to the switch, and the switch will allow the outlet to get power and take it away. Now this part is straightforward. There is a diagram on the side of the switch, and I'll also have a diagram in a set of drawings. I figured it was easier to get this all set up then mount it versus trying to get it all together in a tight spot. Now before I install this, I definitely want to make sure I check to make sure it works. So I'm going to plug the tool in first and then turn it on. I went with this switch because it was the smallest one I can find, but if you don't want to play with electrical, there is a much simpler version that already have an outlet on it. You can check that one out. Only downfall is that button is massive. So just a couple more things to do, and that's to strap the power wire down and also install the outlet. Since the router table is built around my trim router, I can only use bits that has a 1/4 inch shank. So let's create the home for those. The holes are a little tight, so by adding some paste wax, this should help the bit to slide in a little easier. You actually want them tight because you don't want your bits falling out. If you ever bought router bits before, then you know these things can be very expensive, and I was able to pick all these up from Wish for a fraction of the cost. My goal is to become an advanced router user, and practicing with inexpensive bits is the best way to do so. And since all the drawers are also friction fit, I'm going to take some paste wax and rub those down as well. Should help things to slide a little smoother. I wedged the inside of the dust port before drilling out the hole for my vacuum attachment. This way I didn't have any blowout. The vacuum attachment is a tight fit, and believe it or not, we're done. I didn't add a miter slot because it's not something I use often, and it is something that I can add at any point. If you're looking to build one of these, it is something I'd recommend, so go for it. Not only can this be used as a bench top, but it can also be clamped to a work surface like a table saw. There's a ton of storage in here, along with the adjustable fence and also the sliding stops. You can also make additional pieces like zero clearance attachments, and these can be attached to the fence along with any other accessories that you make. With the open front, this allows for quick install and quick removal of your router. The 1/8" metal base allows you to get the maximum cut depth out your bits. And with the open frame on this design, I can easily adjust the router depth without having a dedicated router lift. And with everything so accessible, yeah, changing a bit is also not a problem. The location of the outlet could be pushed back and relocated. And honestly, it's not that big of a deal because you can move it out the way, but just having it completely out the way would be better. So here are a few clips of me with the router table in use, and if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments. If I can't answer it there or I get a lot of questions, I'll make a follow-up videos to address those. And also, if you're a supporter on Patreon, thank you, and I also have the free plans over there along with the SketchUp model. So I had so much fun building this, and it's really kind of cool to get back to the limited tool series. I'm really gonna hope to try to get you guys this more on a consistent basis, so I apologize for such a wide gap between those type of content. If you want to learn more about this build or tackle one yourself, I do have a set of plan down in the video description, so check that out. If you're new to this series, go ahead and check out the playlist down in the video description to get caught up on the limited tool series. I'd like to thank Wish for sponsoring today's video, so please download their app and just check it out just to see if you can find something at a deep discount. And that's about it. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up. Anyways, love to hear what you think about this video. I'll see you in the next one.